After you watch this video, you're going to throw out every 5G conspiracy theory, one world order theory, and I want you to look at the spiritual connection and connotations that COVID-19 has had in our nation. So we are in another civil rights movement again. And so why is COVID-19 here? Is it because that America is the most densely populated in the world? No, we're not. Is it because we are the most populated? No. By the time you finish watching this video, you're going to be convinced that the reason COVID-19 has reared its ugly head here on another level is because of one term: racism. How are you going to say that, Dr. Levy? Let's look at history, and we're also going to look at the Bible. 1863 through 1875, cholera and smallpox made devastation in the United States. Over 100,000 people were killed from this disease. And yes, they had treatments and vaccines, but there was something remarkable in 1875 when this pandemic ended dramatically. One law was passed by legislation in Congress, which was the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which gave African Americans equal treatment rights. Well, okay, so just so ironically, that year that the pandemic ended was the same year that a law was passed to give equal rights to African Americans. All right, let's move on a little further if you're not convinced. 1918 through 1924, the Spanish flu killed 50 million people around the world. In America, it killed over 650,000 people. That's counted on the books, not counting the people that they missed. Well, at the end of this pandemic, there were no vaccines that were introduced. There was no new treatment that was introduced. It suddenly just kind of went away on its own. But something else happened in 1924. In 1924, Congress also enacted the Indian Citizenship Act, which granted Native Americans equal rights and citizenship in America, in the land that was stolen from them. All right, so you're still not convinced. So that year, the same year that that act was signed, that bill was signed, was the same year that the Spanish flu, which was killing millions of people around the world, ended. All right, let's also look at 1957 through 1965. There were several pandemics that were affecting our nation, including the Asian flu that was affecting our nation during that time. Also, thousands and thousands of people were dying in our nation from this. Well, it also ended in 1965. What happened in 1965? Those of you who study history, the Civil Rights Acts were signed in 1965. So now we have COVID-19 that showed its face in 2019, and in 2020 there is a major civil rights movement going on, and COVID-19 along with certain political leaders have caused racism and those who had been hiding as racists in our nation to rise up like an ugly pimple on the face in our nation that needs to be squeezed out. And COVID-19 is bringing that ugly pimple to a head. People have shown ugliness, people have shown racism, people have been taking cars, driving through peaceful protesters. Now, this is before COVID-19. And racism has taken a turn for the worse. We've been saying that the racism was here, but unfortunately, a lot of people didn't believe us. We've been telling you, it's here. And so our nation has been lynching black men. They have been putting black men in prison for other people's crimes or for crimes that they couldn't solve themselves. They have a system where it's limiting their ability to be employed in places where they have equal education and equal training. It's also has a system that is in place to encourage the African American community to be on welfare. Why? Because they're not providing the jobs. They have high crimes. They have drugs that have been put in our neighborhoods and in our communities that's caused disparities. They're throwing them in jail. On top of that, they've made it to a point where they criminalize those drugs, and you can get almost those same drugs from a doctor, and if you have the money and the insurance, you can pay for the same drugs that are equivalent to crack and cocaine. But the moment that someone's caught on the street using it, they put them in prison for 10 to 15 years or 20 years, or some people, this one woman had a life sentence for it. And we see this system in place to cause our people to be oppressed, even to the point where they're encouraging African American communities and Hispanic communities to have more abortions. To where you have in New York City, they had more abortions in 2018 than they had births, because they're encouraging and brainwashing our people to make them think that your children are not worthwhile. And let's not even just leave it with the black community. Let's talk about some other communities. Our Hispanic and Latino community, where they're putting their children in cages like animals, and we're silent on the subject. Those of you who support those type of movements, you've been silent. Even churches, you've been silent on those things. That our Jewish Muslims and Jewish brothers and sisters, and our Muslim brothers and sisters, millions of them in our country who've been working for years, people who have owned businesses for years, people have been showing racism and treating them like terrorists when they're good working Americans, when the true terrorists have been ignored. KKK, the same way you attack and we disbanded Al-Qaeda, the same energy needs to be put into disbanding the KKK and disbanding white supremacist groups and the neo-Nazi groups. Why? Because minorities, we're American citizens, and if you're attacking American citizens, that's terrorism. That's what terrorism is, and God hates it. I hate to break it to you, He hates it. And that's why COVID-19 has spread across our nation the way it has spread across our nation. God is trying to get our attention. And it's so sad that so many innocent people have died from this disease. Even people that I've known personally have died from this disease. And we ask God, what's the solution? And I believe that the solution is that we need to push for equality. And I want to explain why. God hates racism. He does. If we look at the scriptures, we're going to look at a couple of scriptures. And Miriam, God struck Miriam with leprosy. Why? Because she showed racism to Moses' Ethiopian wife. Oh, yep, Moses had a black wife, y'all, named Zipporah. And because she showed racism, because she didn't feel that his Ethiopian wife was equal enough to be a Jew, God struck her with leprosy. Or let's move on a little further. Let's talk about the plagues that hit Egypt. Why did those plagues hit Egypt? Why did God cause those pandemics to run through Egypt? Because of their racism and because of their slavery against the Israelites. And so the same way God caused those plagues to fall upon that land, God has allowed plagues to hit our nation and is trying to get our attention. And not only that, God's even hardened people's hearts. He's hardened hearts to the point where they were telling us that COVID-19 was a hoax. You guys are still spitting out conspiracy theories and getting people to leave out their homes, and boom, they're getting the COVID-19 disease. The lion spirit has gone around to where the CDC has been given wrong information. They were saying, well, just wash your hands and you'll be all right. You could go wherever you want to go. This is CDC now. This is a whole bunch of doctors. I had enough common knowledge. I just majored in biology. I have my degree in biology, but I have enough knowledge to know that, okay, the way this is spreading, it's airborne. The CDC, all the doctors that were there, they couldn't have enough common sense to let you know that this was airborne, and they were lying to us and getting you to go out in the public and put yourself in harm's way without telling you could have just put on the mask to begin with. And we've, not only that, the church. How many have you been seeing on the Christian networks where these false prophets were saying, oh, the disease is going to be ending soon, April 30th, the disease, there's a lying spirit, and there's been lies that have been going on from the White House all the way down to the church house and even down to the crack house. And God's trying to get our attention, and the reason why God's trying to get our attention, we need to balance ourselves out. Why is it that we are having an uprising right now in our nation with the coronavirus going on, our uprising in the nation going on with racism, and all these killings are taking place, running cars into people, lynching black men, shooting people, police brutality? Why? All this is showing its ugly face now because God's trying to get our attention. Congress, President, you need to put laws in place to protect our citizens. You need to immediately cause a major prison reform and disband the KKK and these white neo-Nazi supremacist groups. And once we do this, I believe that God is going to steal our nation, and this COVID-19 disease is going to pass. The same way Congress passed acts in 1965 and the disease disappeared, or in 1924 the disease just disappeared, in 1875 it disappeared. When the children of Israel left Egypt, the plagues left with them. God is trying to get your attention, America. Pass some laws to protect our minorities. Make sure that we don't push hatred toward these minorities, because we are all created in God's image and God loves us. This is my message to America. Make some laws. Congress, make some laws to protect the minorities, and I believe that this plague will end.